I think, look, first of all, I think we all accept that the Community Welfare Officer Service provides a very valuable role, and as colleagues have said, have been a key point of contact with the Health Service initially, and now the Department of Social Welfare since it moved across. And, you know, I recall individuals like Eddie Burke in Strokestown, and who was previously in South Roscommon, like, he knew not only the family but the generation before that, and knew the particular circumstances. So while, yes, from an administrative point of view and the paperwork going into the hub would clearly show the sufficient income coming in, Mr. Burke would know the addiction issues, the domestic dynamic in a particular house, and know where there was assistance needed. That level of knowledge has been lost because the CWOs do not have that understanding. And part of the difficulty, I think, here is, and part of the frustration that we have as members, is that as those staff retired, the newer staff that came in are based in central offices. They're not out in the community. They don't have the same level of understanding of the issues on the ground, through no fault of their own. But they don't have the understanding of the schemes either. Like, I've had a situation where a victim of domestic violence was told to go to the local authority for assistance, when there is a clear strand of funding there supposed to be made available, where it was certified through a domestic violence organisation. That should have happened automatically. It required me to intervene for that payment to be made. Now, that's a pretty standard one, and that level of understanding is not there in relation to that. And I think it's because we have had a lot of new staff coming in. There has been a changeover, and I don't think that the staff themselves are being given the support up through the system. And I think that's part of the problem in relation to the issues. And I know that particularly over the last 12 months, it has been a very challenging time for everyone, and for the staff, the CWOs themselves, trying to deal with what are very challenging individual circumstances. And I think there needs to be a conscious support provided to the staff. Now, part of the difficulty, I believe, is with the centralisation, there's far more paperwork. The CWO now has to justify where a payment is made that may be out of the ordinary. That creates an additional administrative burden. And from talking to the more senior CWOs, the newer people see that as a discouragement and barrier not to sanction a particular payment. And just to pick up on your comment, Mr. Hessian, in terms of the CWO, you know, shouldn't be seen as a sweeper role. That is the purpose of the CWO. You know, if it's not just an arm of the Department of Social Protection, it is not just there in relation to social protection issues, it is to deal with those housing issues. If we're talking about a situation where the alternative is for someone to go into long-term nursing home care because they cannot carry out the adaptation to their house because they don't have the resources to meet the top-up payment, housing was always, in terms of housing accommodation, I'm not talking about, you know, white goods and furniture. Housing was always a key aspect of the role of the CWO long before it came into the department, and I think it's important that that is not lost in the process. Now, if I can come to the reorganisation, and I understand the logic behind it during COVID, but I think with the reorganisation that has taken place as a result of COVID, I think some of that face-to-face contact has been lost. And I accept, I think the helpline and having access to a senior CWO with experience, I think, is a very good avenue to have. But you are losing that local impact and that local engagement. But if you take, in my own constituency, and Mr. Henry, you know it well, in West Roscommon, like, people should not have to be coming physically in to Roscommon town to access CWO. And the reality is, in practical terms, the amount of times the CWO is actually going out, whether it's to Castlerea or Ballahadreen, is quite minimal. And my understanding is it being frowned on or discouraged. It's either over the phone or people coming in, and the people do not have the financial resources. Someone is in a situation where they're in financial difficulty, they don't have the money to put in the petrol into the car to come to Roscommon, or to pay the taxi to come to Roscommon, and that is part of the problem. Now, I raised an issue here with the Minister when she came before the committee here a couple of weeks ago regarding a constituent who came to me. I just think this typifies some of the challenges that are going on. She contacted my office. She needed assistance and supplementary welfare payment. We sent her out the SWA1 form, which she completed. Now, this woman is certified as blind, was in receipt of the blind pension. But with the assistance of some of her relatives, she filled out the form, submitted her bank statement, because most of her transactions were done through the bank. And she then got a letter, unsigned, from the intro office, asking her to fill out all the same information again. And the first thing she did was rang me up and said, "You got me to fill out the wrong form." I said, "No, I didn't. And I actually have looked for this form from the department. I can't get the form." But yet, this woman had to submit a second form. This is a woman that's certified as blind. That form was submitted 1 month ago, and she has still had no communication back. And this is in relation to assistance in terms of purchasing oil. The documentation now has been sent in on a second occasion, and yet there's no engagement, no contact number on the form, no name on the form. So while we're being told that, we're being more proactive in relation to this, there is an individual now where this should have been dealt with. If it wasn't dealt with, someone should have made contact with the woman, because it was obvious if she was in receipt of the blind pension previous to this, she's now a pensioner at this stage, that it's not very easy for her to do this. And yet, these are the types of things that are happening. This is what's leading to the frustration that we're dealing with. And it's adding immense pressure to staff who are overworked in terms of demands, but also in terms of the psychological pressure that they're dealing with. They're making very significant decisions on very challenging circumstances in cases. And I think that culture of discretion that was held, which I would have vehemently defended down through the years, and Mr. Henry knows well, sometimes we would have got a lot of criticism that CWOs would have had too much discretion. I think it's gone far too much the other way now, and I think that level of discretion and encouragement to use that discretion needs to be actively supported from very senior levels within the department. It would be better off to make one or two mistakes in giving out a payment unnecessarily than end up in leaving people in a desperate situation. And in fairness, that was always the culture within the CWO service. That led to a lot of job satisfaction for staff within the CWO service. And the reality is that a lot of the people with the experience feel frustrated with the way the service is developed now. A lot of the more senior people are moving out of the service into other areas in the department, and I feel that the staff that are left do not have the institutional knowledge and understanding of how this system has traditionally worked, and as a result of that, I think it's leading to frustration that we're having, it's leading to the frustration that customers are having, and it's leading to a more difficult and challenging experience for staff on a day-to-day basis that are working within this service. And I hope that you can take that away from this, provide the support to the staff that is needed, who are dealing with a very difficult, challenging situation, and they are the most vital cog in our support service right across the system in terms of the financial challenges that families are dealing with on a day-to-day basis at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And I'll ask Des to come in just in a couple of points. I suppose just what I would say to you, I suppose, I think, you know, I do obviously respect what you're saying and what other deputies and senators are saying. We know that on the ground, deputies and senators will have engagement with people in the area, that this is coming from the real world. It's not, you know, an abstract question of organisation design or service design, that this is about what's happening on the ground, and there are real life cases. I think there's always a challenge in any organisation around culture, you know, that there is a culture in our department of being very customer focused, of helping. That's what we're here to do. And I think that we try and preserve that. Of course, there will be churn in staff, there will be generational change in staff, and we want to make sure there isn't a quick way of maintaining that other than to sort of instill sort of core values in our staff, which I think are there. And I think, as I said to Deputy Curran earlier, the numbers we're seeing for this year, like last year were 55,000, this year probably close to 100,000. I think that points to, you know, the CWOs are really trying to help and are really trying to responsive. I don't think we're trying to frustrate people with the paperwork, but I hear your point. Like, I won't say it works smoothly in all cases, and you know, there'll always be. I think the area of training is something that we do take seriously around the department, and training is the kind of thing that you have to do and do again and do again and do again. And it's about also, I think, you know, the pace of work, the pace of change that we faced over the last number of years has been extraordinary. Tomorrow, I'm 25 years in the civil service. The last 3 years have been the busiest. I think more generally, I would just again emphasise that what we're not talking about here is a withdrawal from face-to-face engagement and centralisation. That's not what we're talking about. What we want is CWOs to be freed from the admin and the paperwork to actually do what they do best. And we want to make sure that they have a presence in the community, that they are available either to be visited or to go out and visit. That's what we want. So I might just ask Des to add, because I know you raised some specific points there, and I don't know if Noel wants to come in with any further points.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Yeah, look, I suppose the staffing and the officers and experience within the roles, that's constantly evolving. And unfortunately, look, we're like a lot of other departments where we have an ageing staff. None of us are getting any younger, and experience is there. And the officer you spoke about there, you know, absolutely, totally appreciate his value within his local community and the work that he did. And, you know, there's no question about that. I suppose, again, in terms of the policy around what we're, the policy is there not alone just to support the public, but it's also there to support officers. Community welfare officers have discretion. And that's, you know, that is even in terms of all our circulars and notes that we say, all our guidance always points out that an officer has discretion to make a payment. You know, the policy and the systems are there not to hinder an officer making a decision, but again, an officer has to satisfy him or herself that, look, the need is there, and you know, if documentation is required to support that, then, you know, that's perfectly valid and whatever. But I suppose there's nobody saying to a CWO who has a case in front of them, you know, we don't want you to make a decision, or we want you to delay a decision on a particular case. I suppose, again, in terms of you know, you mentioned the role of the CWO in terms of sweeper role. Look, you know, yes, we accept that it is there, but primarily the need has to be an urgent need and something that the individual cannot meet themselves, or cannot be supported by some other relevant agency or government department to do that. And that's the way, I suppose, the system is there. Again, look, the idea of somebody travelling from Castlereagh to Roscommon or from Ballahadreen to Roscommon, that's not what we're intending to do to access the community welfare officer. We're trying to improve our channels, whether that be through telephone channels, but ultimately, as Noel has said, The idea here is that the local officer will make the decision in relation to the local case, and that will always be the situation. I suppose, again, in terms of new officers having that experience in training, what we also need to ensure across the community welfare officer that Ronan mentioned in his opening statement is a consistent and responsive approach. And that's what we want to try and do as well, that, you know, as you will know, Deputy, you know, formerly when the CWS came into the department, that was a massive change for experienced community welfare officers coming from the former HSE into the department. You know, but over time, and it does take time to bed change in, you know, it has happened. And I think, you know, the cases that you know, in terms of the numbers, like, you know, we will make 98,000 payments in terms of A&Ps this year. You know, the cases and the case in relation to that individual that's particularly blind, that should not have happened. And we'll be very happy to look at that case and provide an update in relation to that if you send us on the details. And to be fair, that's what we have done in relation to all cases and in all times where we've got correspondence or representatives in from, you know, whoever it is, we have responded to the particular case and where possible try to address and finalise a case, and we will continue to do that. Again, look, yeah.
Mr. Henry, but in that particular case, I submitted the supplementary evidence by email 1 month ago. Yeah. So the department has had it for a month from me directly. Yeah, where I've explained the whole circumstances.
I'd be very happy to follow up on that if you send me the details. And I'm not questioning whether you did or whether you didn't. It shouldn't be the case that somebody should be waiting that period of time. But you know, we will look at that. Again, look, we absolutely understand, you know, that the last period of time has been particularly difficult for staff, particularly and the community welfare service. And we can see this year that, you know, the volumes of applications that have been dealt with are considerable. And that's the reason that the department has sought additional resources to go in to support those officers who are the front line and who are, you know, the cornerstone of the whole delivery of additional needs payments, of other payments, the humanitarian aid scheme, you know, daily expenses allowance, a plethora of different, and you know, the service, as Ronan has said, that they provide, you know, is absolutely excellent. And I suppose, again, look, you know, change is always difficult for us all. And I would absolutely say that, and I'm no different from anybody else, you know, but ultimately what the department is about here is trying to have a more responsive, more sympathetic, deal with the needs. And look, we're not there yet, but the plan is to improve that, and as we go along, and that's what we will do. Just the final group, and Deputy Curran mentioned in the case of domestic violence and those who are suffering from domestic violence, we are working with partners across, you know, TUSLA and the various providers. We have introduced a direct route for access to rent supplement for victims of domestic violence. We are working on developing a policy in terms of supporting our CWOs in dealing with victims of domestic violence and ensuring that a timely and a responsive service is available for those who experience domestic violence.
Mr. Hand.
I was listening very closely to what you were saying there, Chair, and I 100% agree with everything that you've said. I think the establishment of the National Community Welfare Service will be a big change here, and one which I think will assist, I suppose, the whole delivery of our service right across the country, because we are on a journey of bringing in a whole series of supports for our locally based community welfare officers, including the establishment of a dedicated training team for them, something they didn't have before, and to provide them with supports, and to be able to empower them, is what I would say, to do exactly what you're saying. And really that discretion that is available to the community welfare officer is a big part of what they do. And really, in the discussions that I've been having with them, we really want them to use their discretion. It's not that we're hindering them in any way or restricting the amount that they should pay for a particular thing, or restricting them in what they need to do to bring a case to a successful conclusion for the customer. Quite the opposite. And in some ways, that is a culture change, because maybe they feel that the department is in some way restricting them, when in fact that's not the case. And you know, we'd be saying, if in doubt, apply your discretion, make the payment, assist the person, and very much we see the community, the CWOs, as there to help the people, and not in any way to be restrictive, you know. So that's really what we're about, you know. So
Deputy Cran wants to come in, and I just leave this final point with you. And I think probably the difficulty is that a lot of those staff are coming from other sections within the Department of Social Protection, and where there is a culture of control, which is natural enough in relation to all schemes. You tick particular boxes and you're eligible or you're not eligible. Yeah. And I think maybe it's a cultural thing that needs to change in that engagement, whereas the previous staff that were there came in from the health services executive or the old health boards and had a previous very different culture and approach. And I think it could be down to the training that those staff get and the support that those staff get could overcome a lot of the challenges that we're talking about. Deputy